This is Genki 2, Lesson 13, Grammar Point 4. This is offering advice using the phrase "たらどうですか?" So when you want to make a suggestion to somebody or to give them advice, that's the equivalent of a "why don't you?" suggestion in English. We can use the phrase "たらどうですか?" So what this phrase actually is a combination of the conditional form tara that gets introduced in Genki lesson 17 plus the phrase do desu ka, which we already know means like how about or how is something. To form the tara form, the conditional tara form, you use the short form past tense affirmative verb in this case, so the ending that ends in ta, so it's like you're going to form a te form, but instead of the e ending, you add an a ending, plus the character for da, so it becomes tara. So this conditional on its own means if or when. So for example, you notice your friend is sick with a cold, and you think they should go home and go to sleep. If you wanted to make that piece of advice, why don't you go home and go to sleep? You could say, "Uchi ni kaite netara dou desu ka?" Which means, how about if you go home and sleep? So Genki does not really give the explanation about the parts and the conditional form, but since you will be learning the conditional form, this is actually your first exposure to it. And this conditional form, as you'll find out later, also works with adjectives. But we'll get to that when we get to lesson 17. So Genki gives some cautions about using this phrase to give advice. It can have a critical tone, as if you were critical or scolding someone for not already having taken the action. So Genki advises that you only use this phrase when it's clear that somebody wants your advice or your opinion about something. So your friend comes home or your roommate comes in and they're like, "Oh man, I did so poorly on that test. I don't know what I should do." You could say something like, "Motto benkyou shitara dou desu ka?" How about you study more? Why don't you study more? Okay, which, as you can see, could be taken as critical, but sometimes critical is valid. You should not use "tara do desu ka?" to extend an invitation to someone as you might in English. In English, it would be pretty natural to say something like, "Oh, why don't you come by the house?" That's not how this phrase works in Japanese. So if you want to make an invitation, remember we can use a negative present tense question for an invitation. So you would want to say, "Uchi ni kimasen ka?" Right? Do you want to come to the house? Or "Uchi ni konai ka?" You want to come over? You would not use "Uchi ni kitara dou desu ka?" unless your friend was perhaps in crisis and they had nowhere to go and they were confiding in you about that. Then as advice, you could say, "Uchi ni kitara dou desu ka?" Oh, you have nowhere to go and you don't know what to do? Why don't you come to my house? It's a different situation. To use this phrase in more casual speech, all you need to do is shorten it. So you can drop the desu ka and the tara do. So your friend complains about being hungry. "Nanika tabetara do?" Why don't you eat something? Or you can even drop the do and just use the tara with a rising intonation. So maybe your friend's really tired and they're cranky. "Netara?" Why don't you sleep? Why don't you go to sleep? So this is a very useful phrase as long as you use it in the appropriate situations. Remember, you don't necessarily want to give advice when the person you're speaking to isn't looking for advice, but you will find this is very frequently used and it's a good introduction to the conditional tara form.